Section 2 of History of Egypt, Chaldaea, Syria, Babylonia, and Assyria, Volume 3, by Gaston Maspero. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 1. Ancient Chaldaea, Part 2. The heavens having been put in order, he set about peopling the earth, and the gods, who had so far passively and perhaps powerlessly watched him at his work, at length made up their minds to assist him. They covered the soil with verdure, and all collectively made living beings of many kinds. The cattle of the fields, the wild beasts of the fields, the reptiles of the fields, they fashioned them and made them creatures of life. According to one legend, those first animals had hardly left the hands of their creators, when, not being able to withstand the glare of the light, they fell dead one after the other. Then Merodach, seeing that the earth was again becoming desolate, and that its fertility was of no use to any one, begged his father Ea to cut off his head and mix clay with the blood which welled from the trunk, then from this clay to fashion new beasts and men, to whom the virtues of his divine blood would give the necessary strength to enable them to resist the air and light. At first they led a somewhat wretched existence, and lived without rule after the manner of beasts. But, in the first year, appeared a monster endowed with human reason named Oannes, who rose from out of the Erythraean Sea, at the point where it borders Babylonia. He had the whole body of a fish, but above his fish's head he had another head which was that of a man, and human feet emerged from beneath his fish's tail. He had a human voice, and his image is preserved to this day. He passed the day in the midst of men without taking any food. He taught them the use of letters, sciences, and arts of all kinds, the rules for the founding of cities, and the construction of temples, the principles of law and of surveying. He showed them how to sow and reap. He gave them all that contributes to the comforts of life. Since that time nothing excellent has been invented. At sunset this monster Oannes plunged back into the sea, and remained all night beneath the waves, for he was amphibious. He wrote a book on the origin of things and of civilization, which he gave to men. These are a few of the fables which were current among the races of the lower Euphrates with regard to the first beginnings of the universe. That they possessed many other legends of which we now know nothing is certain, but either they have perished for ever, or the works in which they were recorded still await discovery: it may be under the ruins of a palace, or in the cupboards of some museum. They do not seem to have conceived the possibility of an absolute creation, by means of which the gods, or one of them, should have evolved out of nothing all that exists. The creation was for them merely the setting in motion of pre existing elements, and the creator only an organizer of the various materials floating in chaos. Popular fancy in different towns varied the names of the creators and the methods employed by them. As centuries passed on, a pile of vague, confused, and contradictory traditions were amassed, no one of which was held to be quite satisfactory, though all found partisans to support them. Just as in Egypt, the theologians of local priesthoods endeavoured to classify them and bring them into a kind of harmony. Many they rejected and others they recast in order to better reconcile their statements. They arranged them in systems, from which they undertook to unravel, under inspiration from on high, the true history of the universe. That which I have tried to set forth above is very ancient, if, as it is said to be the case, it was in existence 2 or even 3,000 years before our era, but the versions of it which we possess were drawn up much later, perhaps not until about the 7th century B.C. It had been accepted by the inhabitants of Babylonia because it flattered their religious vanity, by attributing the credit of having evolved order out of chaos to Merodach, the protector of their city. He it was whom the Assyrian scribes had raised to a position of honour at the court of the last kings of Nineveh. It was Merodach's name which Berosus inscribed at the beginning of his book, when he set about relating to the Greeks the origin of the world according to the Chaldeans, and the dawn of Babylonian civilization. Like the Egyptian civilization, it had had its birth between the sea and the dry land on a low marshy alluvial soil, flooded annually by the rivers which traverse it, devastated at long intervals by tidal waves of extraordinary violence. The Euphrates and the Tigris cannot be regarded as mysterious streams like the Nile, whose source so long defied exploration that people were tempted to place it beyond the regions inhabited by man. The former rise in Armenia, on the slopes of the Nephates, one of the chains of mountains which lie between the Black Sea and Mesopotamia, and the only range which at certain points reaches the line of eternal snow. At first they flow parallel to one another, the Euphrates from the east to west as far as Malatia, the Tigris from the west towards the east in the direction of Assyria. Beyond Malatia, the Euphrates bends abruptly to the southwest, and makes its way across the Taurus as though desirous of reaching the Mediterranean by the shortest route, but it soon alters its intention, and makes for the southeast in search of the Persian Gulf. The Tigris runs in an oblique direction towards the south from the point where the mountains open out, and gradually approaches the Euphrates. Near Baghdad the two rivers are only a few leagues apart. However, they do not yet blend their waters; after proceeding side by side for some 20 or 30 miles, they again separate and only finally unite at a point some 80 leagues lower down. At the beginning of our geological period their course was not such a long one. The sea then penetrated as far as latitude 33°, and was only arrested by the last undulations of the great plateau of secondary formation, which descend from the mountain group of Armenia. The two rivers enter the sea at a distance of about 20 leagues apart, falling into a gulf bounded on the east by the last spurs of the mountains of Iran, on the west by the sandy heights which border the margin of the Arabian desert. They filled up this gulf with their alluvial deposit, aided by the Adhem, the Diyala, the Kerka, the Karun, and other rivers, which at the end of long independent courses become tributaries of the Tigris. The present beds of the two rivers, connected by numerous canals, at length meet near the village of Korna, and form one single river, the Shat al Arab, which carries their waters to the sea. The mud with which they are charged is deposited when it reaches their mouth, and accumulates rapidly. It is said that the coast advances about a mile every 70 years. In its upper reaches the Euphrates collects a number of small affluents, the most important of which, the Kara Su, has often been confounded with it. Near the middle of its course, the Sajur on the right bank carries into it the waters of the Taurus and the Amanus; on the left bank the Balik and the Kabur contribute those of the Karaja Dag. From the mouth of the Kabur to the sea, the Euphrates receives no further affluent. The Tigris is fed on the left by the Bitlis Kai, the two Zabs, the Adhem, and the Diyala. The Euphrates is navigable from Sumieset, the Tigris from Mosul, both of them almost as soon as they leave the mountains. They are subject to annual floods, which occur when the winter snow melts on the higher ranges of Armenia. The Tigris, which rises from the southern slope of the Niphates and has the more direct course, is the first to overflow its banks, which it does at the beginning of March, and reaches its greatest height about the 10th or 12th of May. The Euphrates rises in the middle of March, and does not attain its highest level till the close of May. From June onwards it falls with increasing rapidity; by September all the water which has not been absorbed by the soil has returned to the river bed. The inundation does not possess the same importance for the regions covered by it, that the rise of the Nile does for Egypt. In fact, it does more harm than good, and the riverside population have always worked hard to protect themselves from it, and to keep it away from their lands rather than facilitate its access to them. They regard it as a sort of necessary evil to which they resign themselves, while trying to minimize its effects. The traveller Olivier noticed this, and writes as follows: "The land there is rather less fertile than in Egypt, because it does not receive the alluvial deposits of the rivers with the same regularity as that of the Delta. It is necessary to irrigate it in order to render it productive, and to protect it sedulously from the inundations which are too destructive in their action and too irregular." End of Part II. Read by Professor Heather and By. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.